Okay, hope you guys see my screen. Okay, welcome everybody. This is the Splunk user group Fort Worth. I'm one of the co-leads for this group. My name is Suman Gajarelli, CTO and co-founder of Bits.io. I have been Splunking since 2013. It's my passion to spread the knowledge by these mediums like the user groups. So I do have a guest speaker today, Seth, who will be presenting this session. Before he introduces himself, I just want to go over the some housekeeping, some useful info. So that's the link for the user group, Fort Worth user group. And then we have a Slack channel. You always can, if it's a free sign up, you can go there and ask questions. There are a lot of other user groups members who actually respond to different types of questions. And yeah, please keep muted if you're not speaking. And we will publish the recording afterwards. If you have any questions, you can use the chat, or you can be unmuted as well. So with that, I think I'll give it back to Seth.
All right, hello everybody. Glad to be here. So today we're going to talk about building your own kind of Splunk add-on for an API to pull data where you may not have something in Splunk base, right? You search Splunk base, and kind of situation is you realize you're gonna have to build it yourself, right? And so this is to help you get kind of a simple method built, or a simple app built, so that way you can ingest any data from whatever API it is. Kind of the common standard today, or the common standard, is OAuth 2 for authorization. And currently Splunk doesn't support one of the common grant types for OAuth 2. And so that's refresh tokens. So there's maybe or maybe not apps that you can purchase that will do this. There's some free guides online, right? And there's actually information on how to do it all yourself. And what we could do is we could spend hours at the keyboard going through, hammering, trying to figure out, what the best way to get this data in is, or we can kind of cheat and use Seth's little guide. So that's what we're going to do today. So back to kind of the initial use case, right? So you need to take data in from an API that's secured with OAuth 2. So you basically have an application server that has some data on it, and then you have the authorization server that you need to interact with to get that refresh token, or the access token, from the OAuth 2 authorization server. So again, let me share my screen, and let's do entire screen. That's going to be easier. Alrighty, so we're on Splunk base, and kind of our target app, our target data source is going to be a website called Imgur. I'm sure a lot of you have heard, maybe used, posted, done things on Imgur. Kind of brave going to the website like this, just on the fly. But in general, it's a place to post pictures, make comments, memes, typically is the use case for this website. And so we go on Splunk base, and we say, you know what, I want to gather some of this data from my users, or from a specific image, or whatever the case may be, right? Maybe I'm curious in how well my images are doing on Imgur. And I go to Splunk base, and I say, okay, let's look for Imgur. Hit search. Oh no, nothing's found. So this is where we need to go and build our own. And the best way to do that is to use the Splunk add-on builder. So let me change this to share just a window. That'll make more sense. So I'm not sending you guys all over the place. Okay, can you see the Splunk base link?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So we'll go to our Splunk server. So what we're going to need to do this, in general, right, we're going to cheat as much as we can, make it easy. So we're going to use Postman for kind of testing all of our scripts and also to convert to Python. We're going to need a test instance of Splunk, like I mentioned, also the Splunk add-on builder, and then the API. So for the API, what do we need? We need to know the URL, the API endpoints. We need a client ID and client secret, refresh token, authorization URL, and possibly more, right? So you want to understand your URL. You want to know the limits of it. You want to know how often you can pull that API without getting on a bad list. All right, so this is a typical screen you see when you stand up your test instance of Splunk. And I'm doing this intentionally to show you a pro tip. When you go on here, sometimes you get this little proceed to whatever the IP address is, and you can continue. Other times, Mac and Google Chrome, they're not fans of accepting certificates that are invalid. So pro tip on here is you can literally type "this is unsafe" to enter, and then that will continue. This one's not going to do it because it's not on that hold up screen, but it will continue even without having to download and trust that specific cert. So if you've ran into that, that's a good tip. My actual test server now. So what I've got here, I'm running 8.2.7.1 for Splunk. It's on Rocky Linux 8.0. So if you're familiar with the change from CentOS to Rocky, this is the version that's recommended to go to. That's kind of the replacement for CentOS. And I've got my add-on builder installed. So you can see it here. I've already kind of went through this just so it's all nice and prepped and works perfectly as I go through the presentation. But what we want to do is we want to create a new add-on. When you create that new add-on, it's going to give you all the options to put an add-on name, an author, a version, a description if it's visible, maybe upload an icon and change some nice theme color. And the point of using the add-on creator, right? Why would we not use something else that's simpler, right? Maybe we have a curl command that we can run as a scripted input that would be much easier. We don't have to maintain any kind of Python code. It's easier. The downside to that is that all the credentials that we store on the system will not be encrypted, and that's the biggest benefit and quickest thing as far as a plus I could see for using the add-on builder. And so if we go to the actual add-on now, and there's a few ways we can collect this data. Like I said, we're really trying to use this so that way we can encrypt our credentials and not have those in plain text and store them within the add-on securely. So this is going through kind of the initial add-on setup, right? So we've got to specify a source type name. We specify an input. What this input will show is here in data inputs. It's going to show right here. So whatever you name it, it's going to put it right in here, and so you can add data that way. So description for it, this one is to import data from Imgur, and collection interval. And this is where I say you need to know your API. So a lot of the APIs with OAuth 2 or whatever the authorization mechanism is, it's going to have a limit to the amount of times you can pull it. So luckily for the Imgur API, it's unlimited. And so to know your API, right, you're going to want to go to the docs that has all the information about what the endpoints are, how to actually get access to it, all those specifics. And so again, you have to kind of come prepped with some of these pieces like client ID, client secret. So when we're building the add-on, go through here, and we want to set up some input parameters. These are variables essentially that we can collect that the Python code will interpret to get the data that we want. So for this instance, what I'm going to specifically use this add-on for, I limited the use case so we can keep it simple. This is to get all the comments I've ever made on Imgur and put them into Splunk. So if we look right here, we've got a username, and then we've also got the host that we can define. So if we want to call it imgur.com or API or whatever that case may be. And then under this add-on setup parameters, here is where we're going to define what we need to be encrypted. So this specific URL is just a text. We don't need that encrypted, so that's okay. Same as client ID. Typically, you don't need to encrypt that. So those are just texts. This client secret and the refresh token, those usually want to keep secure. The refresh token is what allows you, in combination with the client ID and client secret, to get a new access token to access the API data. All right, and so we set those up, and then we go over to the Python code. Now, before we kind of go through all of this, and this is where we can kind of use this, and where you can use my Python code to grab whatever API data you wish. So how do we get to this point? There's many more steps before this that we need to do before we get to that point. So the best way to do it, again, I said we're going to try to cheat as much as we can. And so first, right, we gather their credentials. We understand the API. We've already got the client secret, client ID, all those things. And we need to test the API with the curl. The best program, right, that I think for doing this is Postman. Let me share my Postman on the screen share. Let's see if it lets me share Postman 1 second. Alrighty, can y'all see Postman now?
Yeah, I can see now.
Alrighty, so what are we going to use Postman for? So typically when you hit an API, the easiest thing to do is run some curl commands. That's really going to be the quickest, simplest way, right? You don't have to be a developer to do that. You can Google it, get some quick results. So again, like I said, with the OAuth 2, that's kind of the common one that's used for authorization now. And the grant type that's used is called a refresh token. So what has to happen before you get access to the API is you give the API authorization server your client ID, client secret, and your refresh token. And what that does is that says, okay, here's an access token that you can go take and talk to the actual server that houses all the data, and it will give it to you. It's kind of, you can think of it like a hotel room. When you go to a hotel room and you check in, you do all their authorization through the front desk, right? You give your name, your ID, all the information, and they give you a hotel card. The actual door to the hotel doesn't care who it is. They just need to have that access token. And so that's what this does. And typically the access token is rotating and changes on a consistent basis. That could be after a month. It could be after a year. It could be after, you use it one time, then you've got to get a new one. So there's different variations. So what I try to focus on is just say, okay, if we know that we know our API, right, and we need to get an access token every time we hit that API, why don't we just grab an access token, or at least grab the latest access token every single time, since the requests are unlimited. So that's what we'll do. And luckily, like I said, if you know your API, you can get this information very quickly. A benefit of Imgur's API, which is really, really good, is they actually have like a collection for Imgur already. So instead of having to create all these different posts or gets requests, they've actually got them spelled out all here for us. And that's something you can import from imgur.com. So for example, if you wanted to get a comment, it's already got the API endpoint right there, and all you need to do is provide the variable. So part of that is, hey, what is the OAuth 2 token URL? This is it right here. So what do we need to specify before we can get to that point? Well, we need to input our refresh token, our client ID, and our client secret, right? Those things that I mentioned before, saying that you have to be able to actually get that access token. So if we look at right here, this is just saying what kind of type it is. And again, that's a common one. So what we would do is, if you would like to use curl, or you already have the curl command within Postman, you could go file import, and you could paste that curl command in the raw text here. And then what it will do is it will convert this to a nice view, and so you can see kind of what's happening. And again, the point of using Postman is you get good response, you get error messages, you can do a lot better testing. It's got keys that are pre-specified, so it just makes it easy. So if we hit send here, what we should get is an access token response. And so that's what we see right here in this JSON. We see access token, and this is essentially, right, our hotel key. Someone's off. Sorry, someone was off mute. What essentially we get is that access token. And now we need to, right, either turn that access token into a variable and then pass it on to whatever we're trying to do. So as we can see here, again, this use case specifically is to get any comments that I've made on Imgur since forever. And so if we look at what do we need to get from this specific post? We need to get the access token and take that access token that's always changing and pipe it over here to be able to use it for the actual request for the comments, right? To know that we're actually authorized to do that activity. And so once we have it in here, we have it set. So we'll go grab it right here. I think it actually already has it set as a variable, so it may already have it. Let's double check. Ends in 4.3.4e. Yep. So I've already did a little bit of things before, again, on Postman to set this up, but basically you can click this and assign a variable. So that way, like if it spits it out over here, it'll go ahead and put it in here. And so we hit send. And so now what we've done is we've provided the API with our access token saying, hey, we have access to this API, give us the data. And that data specifically is this API endpoint of, username, which my username is down here, and then my comments I have made. And so you can see the actual raw output here. And so I, put some comments on Imgur just so this would work well. It's hilarious, a good API example. Thanks, Imgur. And the next one, way cool viz, what is this? A comment for API add-on, wahaha. And so on and so forth. Another good comment for this add-on talk. So once we have that, right, we've got the actual information on, or the actual curl commands, or the actual testing done to say, hey, we know how to get this data, but how do we get it over to Splunk? That's the next part. So we can do it right in a script one way, and like I mentioned before, put it inside of a scripted input, but the downside again is that it's not encrypted, and all those values can be viewed by anyone who has access to the file system, right? Which is something we don't want. We want to try to always encrypt at rest and in flight. So if we look at, again, if you're not a developer, a really nice feature of Imgur, what you can do is you click over here on the right side and you get a code snippet. And so what does this code snippet show you? It shows you, right, in whatever language, the code that you're trying to use. So curl, right, that's a common one. You could just grab this and paste it pretty much to any Linux box and run that, and that would pull the data or get the access token. But what we want to do is we want to go down here to Python requests. Python request, right, it's a module where you can do HTTP requests and get the response, and it does all the fancy stuff, right, in that module for you. And so what we have to do is we have to copy this code here, which we can do right here, and put it on, say like a Linux test box or somewhere where we can test, and make sure that this code is working in the Python format. And the reason we need it in the Python format is because that modular add-on input that we're going to do is requires Python. Everyone following so far? Am I speaking too fast? Let's see. Alrighty. So then I'm going to stop showing the Postman, and we'll go over to the Linux box. All right. Can everyone see this okay?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, good. Is it large enough?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I did some testing again earlier, and look at the Python. I did change it a bit, right? I told you we've got to kind of adapt it to Splunk. So with this specific script, what we're doing is same thing, getting the access token and putting it into this access token variable. And when you actually run it and you look at the Postman like we did before, you saw it spit out a whole JSON event basically, and it has other information that we may not want. So what this does is this does the HTTP request and then only grabs the access token and puts just literally the access token into that variable and then prints it out. So I can run this command to test that Python code and use the actual Splunk one. That should give us the access token, spits it out. Okay, so we know that's good. We did some testing on the Linux box. We know that our Python code for the actual access token is working well. And that's the intention, right? Is to test before we actually put it into the add-on. It makes it a little bit easier to do it this way. Look at this second Python. What this does is this is taking that access token and it would put it right here and it would get the actual data. So let's run that. And you can see why we want to automate this, so we're not having to put a new access token here every single time. Sorry, the Mac moves that. There we go. Right. So we got that access token, and now we've put it into our, I call it retrieve comments Python. And that's going to spit out all the data. So we know, okay, this is what the actual data looks like when it comes into the system. And so again, if we look at that specific request, what I'm doing is based on that Imgur API endpoint, right? I'm giving my username and I'm getting comments for this specific user. And this is the header I'm sending is saying, hey, I have this, the bearer is the access token. So I have authorization to get the data from there. And then kind of similar thing, I changed the script up a little bit. So that way we're getting it in JSON format. And that's what that does. So now that we've got our actual code sorted out, we need to take that code. I'm going to stop sharing the Linux box. And we need to move it over to Splunk. Let me share Splunk again. All right, can everyone see the add-on builder?
Yes, we can.
All righty. So there's specific ways that Splunk wants you to write this Python code. And there is a specific document I can share at the end on all these specifics. But in general, you go through this setup of the add-on. So we're back in here, right, where we put our data input parameters, right? What we're going to need for this is we need the username, and then we're going to need access token, client ID, client secret, and refresh token. And over here, what Splunk lets us do is they let us run a test. So this is a really good way to test the code. Again, so we've already tested the code and actually validated, okay, we're getting an access token. We're actually using that access token and getting the data back. What about actually testing it within Splunk? So here is a sample username you can put, which is mine, and then host. And then also I went ahead and already put the access token URL, the client ID, the client secret, and the refresh token that I retrieved from Imgur, right? Going through Imgur's API. So if you go through Imgur's API, you'll get all that specific data that you need to input into here. And so what we're doing in here is pasting essentially that Python code that we created and validated on the Linux box. And then whatever the result of that is, ingesting that into Splunk. And so we have a couple of modules we add on here. We have JSON, we have requests. We actually don't use logging right now. But when you get to the screen initially, I've already got stuff entered in here, but I did leave all of these comments that are in here right when you get to this window. So any new add-on that you do, you'll have all this in yellow comments on what you can put inside this window. And again, I said we have to take the Python code because it's right Python 3 in the Linux box, and we take it in here. It's still Python 3, but there's Splunk specifics. We need to kind of Splunkify the Python code. And if we scroll down, right, this is the code, but here they have all the information that you need on essentially how to get variables. For example, you set one here, how to pull that into your Python code, and other specific settings, like if you need a proxy, if you need to do some logging, whatever you need to do, all these specific lines are commented here, and you can essentially just uncomment it or copy and paste it, right, and use what you need. So specifically, when we're doing this, right, we're using the requests module and the JSON module, right? We need to be able to submit HTTP requests, and we also need to get that data and manipulate it with JSON module. So when we look at it, what are the major components of the Splunk add-on Python module input? One is actually validating some of the inputs, which I'm actually skipping here, right? You could do something like, okay, you can't have special characters or whatever kind of data validation you want to do before it gets to the actual pull the events. You can do that up there. But we're gonna keep it simple on this one. And so what we first need to do in the actual script is we need to bring in, again, all these variables that we set in here, and we need to pass those to the Python script. So these are the actual arguments that you put in and values and say, okay, you know, if you want access token URL, you need to get it using this function helper, and it gets it and puts it as the variable. So we establish all those there, which essentially, again, we've taken everything from here, and now it's in the script dynamically. And when it's in that get global settings, that's how it'll be encrypted. So we take this, you know, back to the Linux code. We essentially take that and paste it in here. And again, we're keeping this simple. So what we're going to do, like I mentioned before, is always get an access token before we try to pull the data, because we know our API, we know we can make unlimited access token requests. So we're going to do that. It keeps it easy, and we always know it's going to be a valid one. So this is doing the same thing as that script, but it just uses those variables here, here, and here, and then also for the URL, and makes that HTTP request. And when I said about kind of like the Splunk specifics, some of these HTTP requests, depending on where it is in the Python code, Splunk wants you to have this in their specific order. So if you see like a request here, I can probably scroll through here and find right here. You can see another request using that helper function. They sometimes, right, depending on where it is in the code, they want you to have it in this order, right? If it's in a different order, it may not work right. So just keep that in mind. If there's something that Splunk is doing, such as HTTP request or changing something to a different format, whatever the case may be, they may want it in their specific format. So keep that in mind. So what this is doing, right, we're doing that same first script that we did in the Linux box, and we're getting a new access token. And then what we're saying is all this is, right, if we have that new access token, right, which is just simple success 200, we're going to take that access token and pipe it into what we're trying to get, right, which is the comments. This is the data. This is the user comments input. And that's the same, the second Python script that we created. But again, just putting those variables in there so that way we don't, it's dynamic and it's not hard coded. And so that's what all this does here. And what it's doing is it's spitting it out in JSON to Splunk, right? That's essentially what it's doing. The issue that we have is if you think about anytime you're pulling data, if you pull data from an API, if there's not a way to specify in the API URL that, hey, I only want new events, or I only want, say some kind of filter. So if we look at the URL for the API here, what we see is it's just comments. And even if we go to the Imgur, we can look at count and we can go to comments. We see right here that there's really not a way, right? You can use pages, but there's not a way to filter to say, hey, I only want these comments. It's kind of like you get all the comments from the user or you don't. And so what's the issue with that? The issue with that within Splunk is that we need to know, okay, we ran our Python code. It's got the access token. It's passed that access token onto the actual API. And we've gotten all this data back. But now we're taking the same data over and over and over and ingesting that data multiple times, right? Depending on your license of Splunk, if you've still got the traditional gigs per day, you don't want to ingest anything that you don't have to. And plus, right, it's unnecessary storage. So what we want to do is we want to have some kind of checkpoint saying, when we hit that API, what can we go off of as the last thing that we saw? And you have to look at the data and kind of understand it. So if we were to go back to Postman and we looked at that result, we could see that in the comments, they all have a unique ID. And so that's what we're going to set the checkpoint as for this specific data. And so you can see here that basically, yeah, we're using this helper function to set that checkpoint within the add-on builder. That's another benefit, is that checkpoint mechanism is already kind of pre-built, so you don't have to redesign it. And again, you can kind of scroll down here in the comments, and if you're not familiar with it, right here, it shows you the commands you need. And again, there's also a document that explains all this. So what we're looking at specifically is we're saying, okay, for every comment, we want to look at the ID number, and essentially, if we haven't seen that ID and we don't have it notated, then we want to add that to this final result. So that way, what it does is we pull the data down. Then the next time that interval runs, right, say it's every 30 seconds, it'll look at what we already have. It'll keep basically that checkpoint in an internal KV store and says, okay, here's the delta. we need to keep all of those events because we don't have those notated. And so then it grabs all that, and on every 30 seconds, you're going to get fresh data, and it's only going to be new data. And then this piece right here, what this does is this actually writes the events to Splunk. So you can run these commands. Again, if you don't test outside of Splunk, it's very hard to troubleshoot because you're not seeing the output very well in here. That's why I like to test it outside of this. But this right here will actually say, okay, now we have the data, right? The result from here, the final result. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to write it? We're going to put it, whatever the end goal is. So our end goal is to actually index that data. So that's what this is going to do. It's going to basically take that JSON from the final result and ingest it. So it'll set, there's no time that it sets in this instance here, but it's going to set the host name, right? Whatever we defined over here as host. And it's going to index, it's going to get it from the selector that we choose when you're basically setting up the add-on through the data input. And I'll show you that. Source, same thing, and source type, same thing. And then after we get all that information, then we're going to write it to events. So what you want to keep in mind is when you're doing this and you're ingesting data and you're testing it, you want to, there's a specific comment down here that deletes this checkpoint. So every time you ingest that data, when you're testing, you don't want to ingest it and then retain that checkpoint in the internal KV store. You want to nuke it so that way every time you're bringing data in, you can see, hey, this is looking correct. So what I'm going to do now is we actually have that data. So I'll do this. I'm going to have this script run, and I'm going to have it delete what's in Splunk currently. So if I go to here, and super sophisticated, using index equals main and searching all time. And you can see I already have some data in here. So what I want to do is I want to delete that. Again, I tested some stuff before just to make sure it worked properly. And we'll look at the index. We've got no events in there. And then what we want to do is we want to turn on this Imgur one, which we set up. I can show you how we set that up. If you do a new one, go to Imgur, and basically just go through typical prompts, put in your name you want to call it, your Imgur username, your refresh token, your client ID, client secret, and once you do that, you will get this input showing here. Mine, I chose to put it in the main default index, and right now it's disabled. And so if we go back, sorry, let's enable this. And mine is set to pull the data in every 30 seconds. So I'm going to run this test, and this test is going to clear out that KV store, the internal KV store with a checkpoint, so that way we can re-ingest data through here. And then we can search and give it some time to actually be ingested. Make sure I mix that right. I go to this one in a second. All right, good. So what I did, right, in that temporary thing I changed is I cleared out the checkpoint data, so that way it knew to go grab all the events the second time, and then it indexed it into Splunk. And so I haven't actually used Imgur in so long. I probably use it copying pictures and stuff, but in general, I haven't used it recently. So what I did is I have some comments from a really long time ago. So I had a E92 car, if you know what that is, back in 2017. And so it pulled these events in, right, and parsed them all correctly. It's got all the information I need, and this is where I could see, okay, whatever data I'm trying to get right now, it's here in Splunk, and then what do I want to do with it? That would be the next point. But now, right, point being is I get the data and it's parsed correctly. And so any comment now, if I've got this input on and I have it set to every 30 seconds, any comment I make right with my user account, now it's going to put it in here into Splunk. Let me go create a comment real quick, and then we'll see it come in live. Just give me 1 second. Just 1 second. I'll connect this up. Okay, so I've made that comment. And so what we'll do is we'll give it about 30 seconds to pull that data in, and then we can see that data now coming in live. So we've got Fort Worth, right? The comment I made was Fort Worth user group for the win. And so you can see, like which comment, which picture I made it on, how many like ups or downs it has, right? Which is like essentially likes or dislikes, whatever you're trying to do. You can now manipulate that data and make it valuable to you. The steps that we could do from here, right, to improve this, other further steps, right? We could go and we could make the add-on SIM compliant, right, to align it. Maybe we use ES or whatever the case is, and we want that data to be normalized. We could also put some logging in there, so that way if we have any issues with the actual ingestion, we can notate that and then understand what's going on. And then also create dashboards, save searches, right, built into this add-on. And so once we're actually done with the add-on, right, we've gone through here. So first piece was creating the Python code, testing it, getting the data in. Then we want to make sure that data is parsed correctly, which I kind of already did in the background. But here, what we want to do is set up all the proper props.conf settings following Splunk best practice, which the best practice is, it used to be called the Magic 6, now it's called the Magic 8. And basically it's a bunch of these properties that we need to set so that way the data is, one, interpreted correctly, and also it's efficient for Splunk. So if we were to ingest that data and not do this, it's going to make Splunk work a lot harder and may not, right, parse the data correctly. So that's something we want to go through. I'm not going to cover that in here, but just something to keep in mind, that you've got to make sure you parse your data properly. And you can, again, go through all these different areas here to do more things with the app, but we're just going to keep it simple. Once you're done building your add-on, you can hit validate. You can try to get app certification by logging into Splunk. We're not going to do that. And so what we've created now, we'll hit download package. And what that's going to do is now we have our custom add-on for pulling data from the API using OAuth 2 and grant type for access tokens. And then the next thing I wanted to show you is if we go to the actual shell, let me change what I'm presenting. Let's go back here to our Linux box and say, okay, we've got that add-on now. Seth told us that the data is encrypted. Is it really encrypted? Let's go check. All right, so there we see that passwords.conf. This is where that's stored. You can see here, anything that begins with like a $7 essentially is encrypted. And so any of those parameters we put for setup will be stored in here securely. And then you can, right, this isn't local, so this wouldn't be on any app. But once you set it up yourself, you'll have your own, client ID and all that stuff encrypted in here securely. All right. That is my spiel. Questions, comments?
Yeah, hello, Seth. This is Teja. I had one question regarding the checkpoint. So we have a checkpoint and we set it to watch out for the ID, right?
Yeah.
And I haven't used the API, but I don't know much about it. But let's say if someone likes your picture right after you pulled it in Splunk, does it come up with a different ID or it's a same?
Yeah, it should ingest a new version, yes, because the data changed. It'll say like, hey, I looked at that, but it's in that current state. So if it changed, it should ingest it again.
Okay, it should ingest it again, even though.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, we could probably set some. Yeah, I need to test to be for sure, but yeah, either way, we could come up with a mechanism to say, hey, if this has changed and it's not trying to reread that same comment, then yeah. I would say that's the comment one is probably a unique use case, right? Where the data is changing after you ingest it. So this would probably a better one would be like an event stream, right? Some kind of events that are coming in, because typically, right, you have the event and it doesn't change. Whereas the comment one, it comments, the checkpoint says, okay, this is the last one I saw. Yeah, we would probably need some kind of mechanism to say, okay, the data changed. Yeah. No, good point though.
Yeah, I had a similar situation, but yeah, we try to do it, but we end up pulling the whole data with this additional information. This is for one of the classroom data type. So I want to see if we can
Yeah,
go.
I feel like you would need to make it for each like field and say, okay, this, you could take it and say like, here's the main ID, and then here is all the properties that need to also be the same, and use that versus just the ID.
So we can use many n number of checkpoints in a loop and look for each and every.
Yeah, or put it together and just say like, hey, this string is the last thing it checked, and if it changed, okay, well then we need to pull that in.
Okay. Thank you. So.
Yep. Yeah, good question. Teja, I found my mistake. Piece I didn't cover, right?
No, I was just curious. I mean, this is a good presentation, Seth. I really liked it. And this I wish you would have done this like 2 years or 1 year ago. It was really easy during that when I was trying to do one of the add-on. Yeah, wish you had this session earlier, Seth. This is a wonderful session, I would say.
Awesome.
Very, very informative.
Good to hear that. Anyone else have any questions, comments? Oh, I see. Okay, let's see. Yeah, MP. Yeah, so on that, this is unsafe when you type that into Chrome. So again, if it's usually it's with the Mac and with Google Chrome, you get to right? Hey, this is not a secure site because it doesn't validate the certificate with your CA cert and throws up the error. Mac doesn't want you to trust that. It does everything it can to not do that. And so some of them are, especially if they're expired, they're very, not necessarily just self-signed, but self-signed and expired. Those it will reject until you manually download it, put it into the certificate manager, and say, trust this thing. Or you can just type in, like I said, this is unsafe as single word, no spaces, and it will let you through. Awesome. All right, Suman, I don't think anyone else had any questions, comments. Hope I didn't go too fast, too much information. Fire hose, right?
Yeah, well, so I think Suman,
Suman might be stepped away.
yeah. So if anyone else any other questions, then we can end the session. Oh, there you go. I see one of the questions.
What's the best way to get additional Python modules? You could, so with, yeah, you just have a different add-on. I mean, you could have different functions, right, within that same one. But if you want to, like, if it's, say it's all Imgur and you have like 3 different ways to get the data, you just have another function in there and have that, all those variables for that function only. So just another function is the answer. And then, of course, if it's a completely different type of data, you're going to want to just have a different, whole different add-on, so you're not mixing things together. So the ZApp module, I'm not familiar with that. What is that? Yeah, I don't. Can you explain more on that? That ZApp module? Not sure what that is. Python SOAP client. Is it Zeep? The Zeep one? Yeah. So actually, is Hans still here? You can use pip to put that into Splunk if it's not already in there, and then you can import that module into the Python code and then use it from there. So it'd be like, I think the commands like Splunk command Python pip zeep, or, however you get it in the actual module, and then when you go back to the add-on builder, import zeep, and then use whatever it has. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's actually one thing we found. I don't believe that's documented anywhere where you can type pip onto the end of the Splunk Python. Anyone else have anything else? Something not related to this that we want to talk about? Alrighty, so I'll probably put this in some form of a blog post, so you can take, let's see, reporting. Yes, I believe the recording. Teja, is the recording typically posted? I know Suman said it would be posted. I'm not sure. if
Yes,
it's on the-
it will be posted, technically, I think it'll be a YouTube video. They'll post it in YouTube as well, I believe. But yeah, it'll be posted in the same user group under this meet. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and then I may do just like a blog post for this and put it on our site, so that way
Mhm.
a little bit easier to digest and copy and paste, all those fun things. Awesome. Alrighty, well, I'm going to stop the recording.